All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Rural Community Assets Fund Finance webinar. I am Tracy Lambright, Deputy Finance Director here at Volunteer Florida, and joining me today is our financial analyst, Janelle Jones. Together, we'll be overseeing this grant, so if any time during the grant year that you have any questions, you can contact either one of us to assist you. The last slide in this presentation will include our contact information for you, and these slides will be sent out and be available for you as well. Throughout this presentation, though, if you do have any questions, we welcome you to please enter them in the chat, and then we will periodically check that chat for any of those questions. All right, again, thank you for joining us, and we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started. Today's webinar will include information relating to the finance aspects of this grant on all of the following topics: understanding your contract exhibits, important due dates, the match requirements, how to complete your financial periodic expenditure reports, also known as PER, so I'll be referring to them as PER throughout the presentation, understanding your required supporting documentation, the budget revision request form and process, and how to submit those PERs through our Laserfish portal. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the contract exhibits. As you can see here, we have Exhibit 1, which is your approved application and program budget. The budget is the foundation for your grant and is part of your contractual obligation. Only costs that are in your approved budget and have been paid for within the grant contract period will be allowable on the grant. The grant contract period is May 1st, 2024 to April 30th, 2025. Please keep this in mind during your grant year and use your approved budgets to guide you. Exhibit 2 is the budget revision request form. There will be opportunities to submit budget revisions, and we will discuss the budget revision information and process later on in this presentation. Exhibit 3 refers to your program reporting requirements, so be sure that you familiarize yourself with those requirements, as they will need to be completed in full as noted and submitted on time before your second draw will be released. Exhibit 4 is the periodic expenditure report, again, the PER. This will be the form that you will use to submit to us along with your supporting documentation to document that you have spent the first half of your grant funds, as well as the second half. Please make sure you're using the correct form for your approved budget. We will talk more about this in just a few minutes. Exhibit 5 is your reporting guidance templates. And please note that the pre-assessment, the initial data certification, and the data portion of the volunteer demographics report was due to Volunteer Florida Foundation by June 8th. If you have not yet completed any of these 3 reports, please do so as soon as possible, as they were already due. Exhibit 6 is the RCAF compliance guidelines. And last but not least, Exhibit 7 is your contract checklist. The contract checklist should have already been completed and submitted as well, and again was due on June 8th. So if you have not yet submitted the checklist, please make sure you also do this as soon as possible to ensure that you remain in compliance with grant requirements. All right, now let's talk about some important due dates. Again, the contract period is May 1st, 2024 to April 30th, 2025. All expenditures submitted must be in the approved budget and incurred and paid for within this period to be allowable. That includes the match expenditures as well. The contract allowed for each grantee to receive 50% of their total grant funds at the beginning of the grant year, and those funds have been released to all grantees who have submitted their draw request letter, W-9, and EFT form. If you have not yet submitted all three of these forms, please do so as soon as possible so that we may process your initial draw. Those forms can be submitted directly to me. The first PER form and documentation to report the first draw has been spent and to report 50% of the match has been met is due to Volunteer Florida Foundation no later than November 15th, 2024. This will be for the period of May 1st, 2024 to October 31st, 2024. The activities portion of the data and activities report and the actual data portion of the volunteer demographics report for this period is also due on this date. I want to make a note that if for some reason that you have not spent all of the funds or are unable to submit by this date, you will need to please contact us to discuss your situation. To be able to receive the second half of the grant funds, you will need to show you have spent the first round of funding and met 50% of the match required and provide all the required supporting documentation to document your expenditures. We will review each submission, and once compliance is met, you will then receive the second half of your funding. If you do not spend all funds received and do not meet the 100% match requirement at the end of the grant year, you will be required to send the unspent funds or funds that were not matched by the organization back to the Volunteer Florida Foundation. The last reporting for the second half of the grant year for the period of November 1st, 2024 to April 30th, 2025 will be due to us by May 11th, 2025. That includes the second PER, the activities portion of the data and activities report, the actual data portion of the volunteer demographics report, and the post assessment. Again, all submissions will be reviewed and assessed for grant compliance. If any expenditures lack the required documentation or haven't been spent and the match is not met, funds will be required to be sent back to the Volunteer Florida Foundation. Please be sure to communicate with us throughout the grant year so that we can assist you with meeting all grant requirements and with staying in compliance so that you are able to receive and able to utilize your full grant funding. All right, as you already know, there is a 100% match requirement to this funding and that you'll be required to meet that match. Any portion of the match that is not met will decrease the amount of grant funds that you can receive. The match expenditures reported, again, must be in your approved budget. They can be cash or in kind and must be documented with the same required documentation as the RCAF share, and we will go over that later in the presentation. You may use state and federal funded expenditures as match as long as the funder is aware and has approved you to do so. And if you do use those type of funding, we may request documentation of that approval for you to use those as match on the grant. And just a quick note, you may not use match that is already being used or has been used as match on any other funding source, as we would call that double dipping, and that would not be allowable. All right, so I'm going to jump over to now the periodic expenditure reports. So this slide and the next slide show both the Exhibit A and the Exhibit B. So some of you may have the training, digital media, volunteer and present promotional resource, and vetting resources categories in your budget. And if you do, you're going to use the Exhibit 4A. And if you have personnel expense, personnel salary, and database software in your approved budget, then you're going to use the Exhibit 4B. All right. To report your direct expenditures, documenting the grant funds that you have received and spent, you will include those in the RCAF share column on these forms. The organization's match expenditures will be reported in the grantee share columns of each form. You will also need to make sure that the form is signed and dated prior to being submitted, and this will ensure that there are no delays in processing. Quick note, electronic signatures and dates are allowable so that you can do those electronically if needed. All right, so now I know you've heard me talk about required supporting documentation several times. And these next few slides will now go over what type of supporting documentation that we require for each expenditure type. For personnel salary expenses, you will be required to provide timesheets for all personnel. The timesheets must be signed and dated by the employee and supervisor, have a certification statement on them, must match the pay period dates for the pay date, and must clearly note the hours dedicated to the grant that are being claimed. You will also be required to provide payroll documentation. That could be in the form of a payroll register, a payroll journal, or salary warrants or pay stubs. And that documentation must also clearly note the pay period dates and the pay date. For any of the personnel fringe benefit expenditures, you must provide payroll documentation. Again, that could be in the form of a payroll register, a payroll journal, or a salary warrant / pay stub. And that documentation must clearly note the pay period dates and the pay dates shown. For FICA, we're going to want to see that there is FICA withholding for that pay period. For any other fringe benefits like health insurance, dental insurance, retirement, etc., that are in the approved budget, you must provide us an invoice for that benefit. That invoice must include a complete listing of the employees and the premiums that are being paid for each, and it must note the coverage period. You must also provide a proof of payment that includes the pay date as well as the payment amount. This type of proof of payment can be in the form of a copy of a check, an ACH online confirmation, etc. Now, for all other budget categories, so we've got database software, training, digital media resources, volunteer promotional resources, and vetting resources, the documentation is all the same. You'll be required to provide a detailed invoice or receipt. It must identify all the items that were purchased as well as a proof of payment. Again, proof of payment must include the payment date and payment amount and can be in the form of a copy of a check, an ACH online confirmation, etc. If you use a company credit card to make purchases, please note in addition to the previously mentioned documentation, you will also be required to provide a copy of the credit card statement that includes the purchase, as well as proof of payment for that credit card statement. Again, that could also be in form of a copy of a check, an ACH online confirmation, a copy of a bank statement, etc. And just one more quick note. I wanted to mention that general ledgers are not considered proper supporting documentation, and those will not be an acceptable to support any expenditure for either RCAF share or the grantee share. All right, we are moving right along, and now we're going to discuss budget revisions. As I stated earlier, you will have an opportunity throughout the grant year to request a budget revision if needed. Please note that expenses that are not in the approved budget will not be accepted. So please keep this in mind as you spend your grant funds. Also, expenditures included in a budget revision request will not be allowable until that revision is approved and would only be allowable from that approval date forward. You also may not add retroactive expenditure. So that means if you have personnel fringe benefits and say you didn't originally include FICA expense and you want to go back and include it, you are more than welcome to add it. But again, you could not go back to the beginning of the grant there to claim that FICA. It would have to be claimed from the approval date moving forward. You will have until January the 15th, 2025 to submit any budget revision requests. After that date, a budget revision request will not be allowed. If you need to request a budget revision, you will need to fill out a budget revision request form. Again, that's your Exhibit 2. And again, if you have the training, digital media, volunteer and promotional and vetting resources in your budget, you will use the Exhibit 2A form. And if you have the personnel salary, fringe, and database software, you will use Exhibit 2B. This is our budget revision process. What you will do when you determine whether you want to fill one out is you will start with your Exhibit 2 budget form using the correct version based on your budget. You will complete at the top the lead agency program name and the date your revision was submitted. In the original budget columns, you will use the approved budget that was in your original Exhibit 1. Any other requests that you do after your first revision will then use the revised budget from that last approved budget as your original budget. You will then report your increases and decreases in your budget changes columns. And please note that should be 0. Remember, when doing a budget revision, you're not getting more money. You are actually just removing money around within your budget to better serve your needs. So your increases will equal your decreases. So those budget changes should zero out at the bottom. You will then need to sign and date the form prior to submission at the bottom of the form. And the next 2 slides give you a view of what that form looks like. So you can see the top, the lead agency, the program, and the date revision submitted information. You'll see the first 3 columns where it's got your original budget. That's where you'll enter that original budget. Your budget changes columns, your pluses and minuses. Again, those should zero out. They should equal each other. And then your revised budget columns that will automatically calculate for you after you enter your first 2 sections, and those should match the same totals as your original budget. And then you'll see at the bottom the approved by, at the bottom you'll see where the approved by and the date submitted to Volunteer Florida. That will need to be filled in as well before submitting to Janelle or I for review and approval. And that's a copy of both of those forms. All right, I'm just going to take a quick moment to look in the chat to see if we have any questions. All right, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So I'm going to keep moving on. All right, so the final portion of this webinar is to introduce the invoice submission and documentation portal called Laserfish. This is where that you will submit your PERs and supporting documentation. Again, you will only use this portal for your PER submissions. All other reports should be submitted in Blackbaud as noted in your contract. So again, I'm going to show you the web addresses, how to use it, and understand the update portal. So this is the web address for the original invoice submission portal. This is the portal that you will use to upload your original submission. This is a web-based portal, so anyone within your organization can access to upload your PERs and documentation. When you are ready to submit, you will visit this website, and this is what you will see. Please note there are red asterisks next to all the all these sections that are required. So you will first start with choosing your funding source by clicking on the drop-down arrow. You will choose Rural Community Asset Fund as your funding source. Next, you will choose a PER year. So since this grant is 24-25, you will use the 2024-2025 PER year with your submission. Next, you will move down and you will choose your organization's name by clicking on the subgrantee organization drop-down. Choose your name. Your names will appear in this list as they were submitted on your W-9 form. Once you have completed that information, you will then upload your file by either clicking on the upload button and adding the file from your document folder, or you may choose your file and drag it directly into the supporting documents field. Now, what we require is that all documentation, PER form, followed by your documentation, be included as one PDF form. Laserfish is a web-based portal, so it can hold larger PDF, so there is no reason that it should not be able to handle what you're going to upload. If you have any problems uploading or any problems with getting into Laserfish at any time, again, please contact us so we can help you with that. Once those steps are completed, you will then go down and enter your submitter's information. The email and person's information that you provide here will be the person we communicate with about the submission. So make sure you're using that person's information if you want us to contact them. Any subsequent requests or clarification requests will go directly to them by the system. So if we need further information, that's where it's going to go. So just make sure that you're putting that information for that person within your organization that you want those requests to go to. You'll enter a first name, last name, an email address and phone number, and then click on submit. When you click the submit button, you should receive a notification on the screen that it has been submitted. If you do not receive that, we most likely did not receive your submission. Also, after you make that submission, you shall also receive an email. And this is a sample of that email. It's a confirmation. It'll say, thank you for submitting whatever that PER you chose, and it will assign you an instance ID number. Please make sure you keep track of what that is in case there are any requests or clarification needed, as you will need that instance ID number to submit anything else. Again, you will only use this first portal for that original submission. If you receive a request to provide more, I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides, the update portal where all of that will be submitted. All right, so once you've submitted, the financial analyst will receive a task to review your invoice submission. Once the analyst reviews, if it is ready to process and nothing else is needed, they will approve it in Laserfish. If the analyst reviews the file and needs further clarification or documentation, the system will send an email to the email address provided in your original submission with a request. This slide here will show you a sample of what that email looks like. You will then have 5 business days from the date of this email to provide the requested information. Again, it's going to say thank you for submitting. It'll list out what is needed, and then it'll ask you to provide that within 5 business days. You can click the button where it says to submit your updates by clicking here. That'll take you directly to the update portal. And again, if you notice, this email also gives you that instance ID number that you will need in the portal. So this is the update portal. Again, you will use this if you receive the email that requests further information or clarification or documentation on what you have submitted. Again, you'll see the red asterisk for what is required, and you will see that number 1 is entering that instance ID number. And as you've seen in both the confirmation emails that were received, both of them give you that number. So you will need to include that number when submitting anything in the subgrantee update portal. Again, your funding source is the Rural Community Asset Fund. Your PER year will be 2024-2025. You will then choose your subgrantee organization name again and the email that was used for submission, and then you will upload any of the documents or corrected documents that you were requested to provide, and then click submit. Again, as I said, you should receive a confirmation on the screen that says that it has been submitted. If you do not receive that, most likely we have not. If you are unsure and you don't receive that, or you receive the confirmation email or don't receive the confirmation email, just please reach out to us so we can help figure out what's going on and get that fixed for you. And again, these give you step-by-step exactly what I just read for you. So those will be included in these slides for you as well. And as promised earlier, here is the information where you can reach Janelle or I if you have any questions. So Let me go over to the chat and see if there are any questions before we wrap this up. All right, so we have a question in the chat. It says, does this have to be submitted on a monthly basis with all monthly PERs to be submitted November 15th? Or can it be submitted one time with all monthly documents included in one PDF file? Yes, for this grant, you only have 2 required submission dates. So you can submit one PER to show how you spent the first round of draws, and then submit a second PER with how you submitted or how you spent the second round. Also, I'll make a note that if you spend those funds before the end of October, you're the more than welcome to submit that PER early so that we can go ahead and get that second draw out to you as well. All right, are there any other questions before we wrap up today? All right, well, you guys did it. This concludes today's webinar. We hope the information we provided today has been helpful and it will assist you in making this a successful grant year. Again, if you have any questions or need assistance at any time throughout the year, please reach out to Janelle or I, and we will be happy to assist you. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.